All right, let's move on to part 2 of today's lesson. This part of the lesson is where we will address today's learning objective. Today, we're going to continue to work on multiplying a fraction by a whole number. This is a continuation from the math message problem. Several of the next few slides will all be related to the math message problem, where they're talking about a group of kids making paper mache globes. The situation says, the Social Studies Club wants to make paper mache globes. To make the paste, each club member will mix 3/4 cup white glue with 1/4 cup water. The club has 9 members. They have 1 quart of water. Now we decided that from the math message, they need a total of 2 1/4 cup of water so that each member can make their own globe. But now we need to figure out our next question. The question says, how much water was left over after the activity? Remember, they have a total, before they get started, 1 quart of water. And for each kid to make their own globe, they need 2 1/4 cup of water. If you'll notice, that's 2 different units. 1 quart total, and they're going to use 2 1/4 cups. You can't easily subtract quarts and cups, so what you need to do is make them have both the same unit. So let's focus on making them both cups. The group has a total of 1 quart of water, but if you use the gallon drawing, we know 1 quart is the same as 1, 2, 3, 4 cups. So we can start with 4 cups, that's how much they have total before they get started, minus 2 1/4 cups. That's how much water is needed so that each student can make their own globe. Before we can subtract, though, we have to make sure that both numbers in our equation are mixed numbers. Because first we have a whole number 4 and then a mixed number 2 1/4. So what we need to do is change 4 to a mixed number. We're not going to change its value, we're just going to change the way it's represented. We're going to reduce the 4 down to a 3, then we're going to write a fraction that is equivalent to a whole and has the same denominator as our other mixed number. So I'm going to say 4 is equivalent to 3 4/4, because remember, 4/4 is a whole. So that's like saying 3 plus a whole, which would be 4. Now we can subtract 3 4/4 minus 2 1/4. Now we have 2 mixed numbers, so we can easily do the subtraction. I'll subtract the whole numbers, 3 minus 2, that's 1. Then I'll subtract the fractions. I'll focus on the numerators. 4 minus 1 is 3, and we keep the denominator as 4. And remember, we converted the quart of water to cups, and we know they are using 2 1/4 cups to make the projects. This is telling us that when the activity is over, there should be 1 3/4 cups of water left after the activity. The next part of the question says, with the leftover water, how many students could make another batch of paste, and how do you know? Well, remember, each student needs 1/4 cup of water to make one of the globes. So, how many kids could make another batch of paste for their globe? So I would try to think about how many fourths are there in 1 3/4. This is where I might make myself a drawing. This first circle represents the whole, or the 1. And we're wanting to see how many fourths are in that hole. So I would divide my 1 up into 4 equal pieces. And each one would represent 1/4. So there's 1/4, 2/4, oops, let me change that to a 4, 3/4, and 4/4. So there are 4/4 within a hole. And then we need a circle to represent the fraction 3/4. So we've got 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4 in the first circle, and we need to represent 3/4 in the second circle. Here's 1/4, 2/4, and 3/4. So if each fourth represents a student being able to make a batch of this paste, how many students are going to be able to make another globe? Here's 1 student, 2 students, 3 students, 4 students, 5 students, 6 students, and 7 students. Since each student will need 1/4 cup of water to make a batch of the paste or glue and water mixture, it looks like there will be 7/4 left over. So 7 kids can make another globe. And we know this by the diagrams or pictures that I drew here to represent the fourths that are left over. Now we're going to move on and talk about the glue part of the story. Same story. The Social Studies Club wants to make papier-mâché globes. To make the paste, each club member will mix 3/4 cup white glue with 1/4 cup water. The club has 9 members. They have a 1/2 gallon of white glue. Will there be enough glue for everyone? Well, we are just focusing on the glue part this time. I'm going to mark out the part about the water because we're not looking at the water, just focusing on the glue. Still 9 members in the group. They have a total of a 1/2 gallon of white glue before they get started. Let's look down at the big G diagram. Remember, the G represents a whole gallon, so since the club has just a 1/2 gallon of glue, I'm going to draw a line down the middle so that you get an idea. This is what the group has, a 1/2 gallon of glue. So let's decide, will there be enough glue for everyone? Well, how many members are in the group? We know from the story there are 9 members in the group, and each one needs 3/4 cup of white glue. I want you to now pause the video and see if you can figure out how much glue is needed so that each kid can make their own papier-mâché globe. Once you have figured out the answer for how much glue will be needed, then turn your video back on and we'll check your work together. All right, we know there are 9 members in the group, and they each need 3/4 cup white glue. So in my mind, I think I'm going to take 9 for the students times 3/4 cup of glue, because that's how much each one needs. And remember, to multiply a whole number by a fraction, you can put the whole number over 1, then multiply the numerators, and multiply the denominators. So we're saying here they need a total of 27/4 cups of glue. Well, we know that's an improper fraction. So we need to ask ourselves, how many times does 4 go into 27? 4 goes into 27 6 times, because 6 times 4 is 24, and the difference between 24 and 27 is 3, and the denominator stays 4. So how much glue do they need so that all 9 members can make a papier-mâché globe? They need a total of 6 3/4 cups of glue. So will there be enough for everyone to make it? Well, let's look and see. We know they have a half gallon of glue. How many cups are in a half gallon of glue? There's 2, 4, 6, 8. There are 8 cups of glue in their half gallon before they get started. And they only need 6 3/4 cups of glue so that everybody can make a globe. So do they have enough glue? Yes, they do. They have more than enough glue. Now let's extend that problem and find out how much glue's left over after everybody makes their globe. Well, we said that they started with a half gallon of glue, and they need a total of 6 3/4 cups of glue. So how are we going to figure out how much is left over when one is in gallon units and the other one is in cups? We're going to do the same thing like we did when finding out how much water was left over. We're going to change both to cups as the unit. Here we have a half gallon of white glue. So how many cups are in a half gallon of white glue? 2, 4, 6, 8. 8 cups of glue are in a half gallon. And we figured out from the previous slide, they need 6 3/4 cups glue for everyone to make their paper mache globe. Before we can do the subtracting, though, we have to turn that 8 into a mixed number so that we're taking away a mixed number from another mixed number. So I'm going to represent that 8 as a whole number and a fraction. Remember, 4/4 is the same as a whole. So when you put 7 and 4/4 together, it's equivalent to 8. Then we can subtract 6 3/4. Subtract the whole numbers, subtract the numerators, and leave the denominators the same. So how much glue is going to be left over? 1 1/4 cups of glue. Is there enough leftover glue for everyone to make another batch of paste? How do you know? Well, we know each person needs 3/4 cup of glue to make a globe, and there are 9 people. Is there enough for 9 people to make 9 more globes? Let's look and see. We know there are 9 people. They each need 3/4 cup of glue. So we could take 9 times the 3/4, multiply the numerators. This is just like we did a few slides ago. Multiply the denominators, change it to, a mixed number. Is that enough? What we have left over? 1 1/4 cups. Is that enough for everyone to make another globe? Remember, for everyone to make a globe, they need 6 3/4 cups of glue. But we only have 1 1/4 cups left over. So, will they have enough for everyone to make another batch of paste for a globe? The answer here is no, because 1 1/4 cups is much less than 6 3/4 cups. All right, now we're going to move on to the math journal part. So if you don't have your math journal out, get it out now and find page 232. This situation is all about sisters making muffins. The situation at the top says, Suma and her sister Pooja are making 12 blueberry wheat muffins for breakfast. The recipe lists the following ingredients. before I look at the ingredients, I want you to realize and make this note in your book, 12 blueberry wheat muffins, that's the same as saying 1 batch. So write that up above. 12 muffins means 1 batch. Because sometimes they'll talk about batches and then sometimes they'll tell the total number of muffins. So every 12 muffins that they make represents 1 batch. Some of the ingredients are all of the ingredients are listed below. They need 1 cup white flour, 1/2 cup whole wheat flour, 2 teaspoons baking powder, 3/4 cup blueberries, 1/4 teaspoon salt, 1 egg, 1/2 cup skim milk, 2/3 cup honey, 1/4 cup cooking oil, and 3/8 teaspoons cinnamon. Now it says we need to solve the number stories. In the space below each problem, use pictures or equations. You don't have to do both when it says that word or, to show what you did to find your answer. For problem number 1, it says the sisters want to triple the recipe. Circle that word, triple. If they want to triple the recipe, do you know what that means? That means they want to make 3 of the recipe. So that means they need to take everything in the recipe and multiply it by 3, because to triple it means to multiply it by 3. So how many teaspoons of baking powder do they need now? If they're making 1 batch of muffins, the baking powder amount that they'll need is 2 teaspoons. But if we're going to triple that recipe, we have to multiply it by 3, and that gives us 6. So if they triple the recipe, they need 6 teaspoons of baking powder. Now let's talk about the salt. The salt they need is 1/4 teaspoon. But since they are tripling the recipe, they have to multiply it by 3. Remember, put your whole number over 1. Multiply your numerators, multiply your denominators. If they're going to triple the recipe, they will now need 3/4 teaspoon of salt. Make sure you're writing all of this information and notes into your math journal as I work. Now I'm going to give you a little chance to work on part C and part D. Part C says, how many cups of whole wheat flour do they need now? I want you to pause the video and see if you can solve part C. We'll do part D together. So if I said you're going to do part D on your own, we're going to do it together because it's a problem we haven't talked about before. So pause your video now and see if you can solve part C. How many cups of whole wheat flour do they need now? Once you have the answer, turn your video back on. All right, let's talk about it to see if you got this answer right. For 1 cup of the muffins, they need a 1/2 cup of whole wheat flour. But since they're tripling it, we have to take that number times 3. Before we can multiply, put the whole number over 1. Multiply the numerators. Multiply the denominators. And then we get an improper fraction. So you have to ask yourself, how many times does 2 go into 3? 2 goes into 3 one time with 1 left over, and the denominator stays 2. So how many cups of whole wheat flour do they need if they triple the recipe? They need 1 and 1/2 cups. I hope you got that answer right all by yourself. If so, it'll make the part for the Google form pretty easy for you. Let's talk about D, because D is asking you a question that we haven't talked about today. It says, between what 2 whole numbers does your answer to problem 1C lie? What they mean is, when you look at that number, 1 1/2, what is the whole number that's smaller than 1 1/2 and the whole number that's larger than 1 1/2? So I ask myself, if I'm going to round 1 1/2 down to the nearest whole number, I would round it down to 1. But if I was going to bump it up to the nearest whole number, that would be 2. And that makes sense because 1.5 is more than 1, but less than 2. So the two whole numbers where our answer lies is between 1 and 2. All right, let's move on to the part that you have to do on your own. You're going to work on problem number 2, still all about the muffins. If you look at problem number 2, it says Suma and Pooja decided to bake 48 muffins instead of 12. Make a note to yourself up at the top. 48 muffins really just means 4 batches. So instead of tripling it or multiplying everything by 3, if they're going to make 4 batches, that means you're going to multiply everything by 4 this time. You're going to do that for part A, part B, part C, and part D is just like part D from number 1, where you have to talk about the whole numbers where your answer lies. So now you can turn this video off, solve the problems for number 2, part A, B, C, and D, and then once you have those done, you can go on to part 3 of today's lesson.